Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz has the night off. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment. A bombshell announcement in Cook County politics.
I will not be on next year's ballot by my choice.
Cook County State's Attorney prepares to step away after 2 tumultuous terms.
The results of the election returns are hereby approved, adopted, and proclaimed.
As Chicago makes the election results official, the mayor-elect gets ready to move into City Hall. More immigrants flock to Chicago, but where will they stay? The ComEd 4 anxiously await a verdict in the corruption case that's rocked Springfield.
This is not a time to be complacent.
And President Biden is running again. Will 24 be a rematch of election 2020?
Here to take on all that and more is our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Celeste Bott with Law 360, Andy Grimm with the Chicago Sun-Times, Karen Jordan with ABC 7, and Christine Flores with WGN. Let's get right to it. And Karen, I'm going to begin with you. Kim Foxx leaving, doesn't have to. She could run again, of course. So why?
I believe she has said that she was never in this to be a career politician. And I think, frankly, these past 2 terms, well, she's halfway through her second term, it was becoming increasingly frustrating for her to always answer to critics and the criticism of some of the policies and the decisions that she's made with Justice Smallett. And of course, taking a lot of heat for the Safety Act as well. I think that really was beginning to weigh on her. And she said that she was in office during times when her daughters, those were their main formative years. So she's ready to step away in a year and a half.
Andy, if she were to have run again, would she have had an uphill battle? Would she have won?
You know, there was some speculation, right, that with the Vallis's performance in the city, that her base in the city, a very conservative mayoral candidate gets a lot of votes, and she needs to run up the score in the city. Although she did beat him in the suburbs. I mean, I think it would have depended on who ran against her, because what we saw this last time around is that really, no big name contenders really stepped into the race and mounted a viable campaign. You had Bill Conway, who was a political newcomer, certainly tons of money, but now he's an alderman, so you would assume he'd be out of the race. But I do think that the headwinds that they talked about for the sort of the vanguard of reform prosecutors that she came in with in 2016, some have struggled. Chesa Boudin in San Francisco was a victim of a recall. The headwinds for these reform prosecutors advocating for what is portrayed as soft on crime policies in a time when there's rising crime and violence has been difficult. But those are, primarily related to COVID pandemic. We've seen these happen whether you're a reform prosecutor or not.
All across the country.
Right. And so you heard her sort of making the case for her ideals in her farewell. Well, I guess it's not her farewell, but she didn't run.
It seemed like it. And in fact, actually, let's hear from Foxx herself a little bit more from her announcement.
I refute the supposition that where we see ourselves today, with the rise in violent crime that coincides with the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, is somehow the result of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. It just doesn't add up.
So Celeste, what is her legacy? We heard from Foxx herself sort of how she envisions what she's accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously she has been a reform prosecutor, and she was saying in her farewell that she thought it was unfair that things like Justice Smallett were following her around, and issues about violent crime as well. She chalked that up in part to the COVID-19 pandemic and said that shouldn't be laid at her administration's feet. So I agree that she's probably just done with the criticism and ready to move on, and she certainly doesn't feel like her legacy is stained by some of these things that critics have said
taking
about
its toll. She said that her presence alone, being a black woman in that office. Absolutely. But how much of this is Jussie Smollett? Is that going to be, she herself said that'll be on her political tombstone? Deservedly?
You know, I actually ran into Judge Tim Evans at a function today, and he's a guy with a long career in Cook County politics, and he felt like that's probably not going to be what sticks with people. I do think for the lay person, it's just a lot easier to have an opinion about what went on with Jussie Smollett than it is about bond reform or policies.
Wrongful conviction.
Wrongful convictions. I mean, and so that sort of became, I think, just sort of as one of the people I interviewed for a reaction piece said, you know, that was the Flint Taylor, the legendary civil rights attorney, said that was the stick that her opponents beat her with, because it was a little easier to get attached to. But like, will anyone remember Jussie Smollett in 20 years? I think it'd be
absolutely. I mean, she did make a point of saying her office led the country for overturning wrongful convictions, and so she was. I feel like, if you're looking for staying power and something that really has the potential to have a more lasting impact, it could be that. But
well, and so what of that? Either of you, Christine, feel free to weigh in here, of course. Prognostication on who could replace her. She is leaving, and clearly already progressives are talking about they want a like-minded individual to take that office. But of course, there are going to be the tough on crime folks who say that she has been way too lax and blame her for that increase in crime, though she says it is undeserved. Any thoughts on who could be candidates?
You know, right now I have no idea on my behalf on who that could be, but it's very interesting that this is, you know, it's been a long time since we've seen a seat come empty like this and be up for grabs, right? So it'll be interesting to see who comes out and just who is being supported by a lot of these groups who have either been on both sides of the aisle when it comes to her office and everything that we've seen come out of it.
And at this point, Toni Preckwinkle, her mentor, has not named another protege just yet, her successor. So, yeah, the field is kind of wide open. You hear a couple of very familiar names, possibly Bob Fioretti, Richard Boykin as possible contenders. They've run for other offices before. Joe Ferguson could be a very interesting one, former Inspector General. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, and whoever gets that backing from Preckwinkle presumably would have it from the Cook County Democratic Party as well. So a lot of power there. When Fox made this announcement, she was very emotive, kind of got verklempt about the notion that she was leaving, but also giddy in talking about a new mayor. So Andy, let's leave it on this. How much of her stepping away has to do with the fact that Brandon Johnson, who shares perhaps a similar point of view on many of these crime stances, is going to be the mayor? I mean, she was literally like paused and sort of laughed and got this huge grin at the notion that it will no longer be a Lightfoot administration.
Yeah, I think she must have been imagining what it would have been like to be the state's attorney and not have the mayor and the chief of police in Chicago perpetually sort of flogging you for like revolving doors and bond court. So, you know, she definitely took a lot of heat from the prior administration. She's definitely a supporter of Brandon Johnson. I've heard some folks say that there's some assumption that there's some position in the city that might be awaiting her.
There we go.
But, you know, I'd actually would think with, I think that it sounded like to me from that speech that there was a lot she wanted to say about the policies she came in, she was elected on, that she continued to endorse despite all of the backlash. And I think there's a place to do that. Like I'm picturing like maybe something a little less public facing, maybe something more on the line of like a nonprofit or an advocacy group that would advocate for reform. I do think after the 8 years in the crucible, she might look for something a little easier.
It did seem like almost she wanted to vent, to sort of let it out in that address. Now, speaking of the mayor-elect, with just 2 weeks or so before his inauguration, Johnson announced a transition team. Here is what he said.
The fifth floor has to reflect the best interests of the entire city of Chicago. And there are a number of individuals that I've met over the course of these last 3 weeks. It feels like it's been a little bit longer, but over these last 3 weeks that have demonstrated an eagerness to serve. And they've repeatedly said, or they've asked, how can we help?
Christine, on that transition team, there are a lot of progressive activists, union members, no surprise, but I mean, it really does run the gamut. I think only, however, one member of city council. Any names or significant players that stick out to you?
None that specifically stick out to me, but very interesting to see the names that were chosen, right? Like you had mentioned, there are a lot of union members that we see make part of that too. And and a lot of things that he ran with when you're talking about schools, when you're talking about immigration, some of these topics that are pretty big right now too as well. So interesting to see the pick there.
It also does include 2 members of the Chicago Police Department who stepped down from the CPD during the Lightfoot administration. What does this say, if anything, Karen, about the relationship that Johnson is planning to have when it comes to the Chicago Police Department?
It sounds like he really wants to prove that he is trying to be a mayor for for the entire city, which he has said many times before. And I think he wants to make a good impression off the start that he is not going to be a so-called soft on crime mayor. Even though he is a progressive person, I think he still is taking the law and order concerns seriously.
And perhaps, who knows what role these folks will have to play. And there was talk in Vallis about those retirees coming back. We will see. Another one, though, that's gotten some attention, Celeste, is the business community, or lack thereof. There's a representative from, say, World Business Chicago, but none of the regular marquee CEOs that typically serve on transitions. And we know that the business community is a bit uneasy, perhaps, about a Johnson administration. What do you make of the business ties, or again, not business ties?
You know, I think this is a man who ran on doing things differently. So the idea that he's surrounding himself by, with people who may not be the people that you traditionally expect, this is somebody who wants to try something different. So
and here we have it.
Yeah, and here we have it. It's,
that.
He's staying true to that word.
Anything telling that there's a bunch of subcommittees: economic vitality, immigration, workers' rights, public safety. The list goes on. No budget committee. Is that something that you would have if you were mayor?
It's probably something I would have if I were mayor. I think that's fair to say. But
you're not.
No, I'm not.
You're a reporter, so we won't put you in that position. Andy, what does Johnson need to do? Again, I think he's got 17 days left before he moves from mayor-elect and then drops elect from that title, and he's the one in charge. Couple of weeks. What does he have to accomplish?
Wow. I mean, that is when you consider all the different angles that the city is sort of beset by troubles, again, coming out of a pandemic, he will be, you're talking about the budget, right? Like this is an administration that is not going to benefit from, billions of dollars in federal COVID relief funds, at least not for the balance of his administration. I think that, I think people are going to be waiting for that sort of like that fiscal plan. It's going to be very interesting to see parts of his agenda that required, tax increases, all that. Getting that through a city council what we have just seen with Mayor Lightfoot is how do you move an agenda through a divided council that's going to be much more independent? I mean, he is coming in with a constituency from labor, but, where does he get his support? How is he going to line up his support on the council? How is he going to actually move this agenda? I've got to say, it's an ambitious agenda. It's a new style of governance, and I couldn't begin to think of what he's got to show.
And by the way, because I think this is something we're all curious about, we haven't really heard from Mayor Lori Lightfoot in terms of exchanges with reporters. She's had public appearances, but Christine, what do we think of that? She's still the mayor?
Right. Well, it seems like since elect Johnson, right? He was put into this position. It seems like at every press conference, there's always that question that comes to Lightfoot, which is like, well, what do you think Johnson should take from this, or what should he learn from this? And a lot of her responses have been just, take note, and some major topics that we have been encountering here in the city. So take note.
There we go. All right. Speaking, Johnson's opponent still in the headlines, although I'd venture that he would rather not be. That is in part because he filed a case alleging that a consultant, who's, by the way, the brother of a different failed mayoral candidate from before, Amara Enya, was paid $700,000, but then didn't do any work. Now that consultant is threatening to countersue the Vallis campaign. And oh wait, by the way, lesser paid campaign workers say now that their checks from the Vallis campaign are bouncing. Karen, does this feed at all and give credence to those who say that Vallis didn't actually have the fiscal chops that he ran on?
It's interesting because this person, this political consultant, now is turning the tables on Vallis, saying, well, maybe the voters were right in voting Johnson into office. It sounds like sour grapes it could be, but there is a lot of, it's very murky. It's very murky right now to see who in fact is coming up short.
In $700,000, is that run of the mill?
I mean, I think it does show.
We all got like an awkward laugh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're all
Jealousy, maybe.
Well, I mean, I've got to say, like, it does seem to show that there was a real desperation to try and, at least hive off some support from the black community, and that they cast their lot with, a guy that I'd never really heard of as a political consultant. And then, to my mind, the litigation was just shocking in that it exposed that you basically got had, and exactly like your fiscal chops, your attention to detail, and your competence, which were all your major selling points as a candidate, are all sort of on display as being like totally absent in this hire.
Does it make you wonder why he filed a lawsuit and brought attention to this in the first place?
First thing that crossed my mind when I saw the headline.
And was it sabotage even by this political consultant, since he is the brother of a former failed candidate?
So much that we want to know. Where politics becomes soapy, I suppose, in certain ways, right? But on to some very serious topics, and that is, of course, one of the issues that Mayor Johnson is going to have to deal with is immigration, with more than 7,000 asylum seekers in the past 8 months coming to Chicago, and more are expected. Christine, you've done reporting on this week, including families being shuffled from CPD stations because shelters have been reaching capacity. What are the families saying? And oh wait, the CPD too, they're not thrilled.
Yeah. So first got the tip, right? And first off, they've been coming in since about 3 months now, people that have been seeking asylum. And we got a tip earlier in the week that they were essentially camping out, living in some of the police stations. And so we go and we talk to some of these families. And one of the things that they had been telling us is that they were told that they should stay put where they're at, right? They called 311, the city's service line, and they told them stay put, because if a shuttle comes through and if you're transported, if you're not there, you're going to miss your spot. You're going to have to start the process all over again. So to them, of course, frightening, because they've already made the trek this far, and it's so much unknown for them. Then the next day, a Thursday, we were at O'Hare because we got another tip that more families had arrived on 2 planes. So we go and we talk to the families, and
from Texas, by the way, right?
Yes, they had all been. They said that they had been vetted down in Texas at the border, given a one-way ticket to Chicago, and just arrived. And one of the questions I was asking them is like, well, what happens next? They're like, we don't even know. Like, they just told us to wait, and we're just waiting. So some of the police officers have also been giving them food, clothing. People have been stopping by to give them food and clothing.
So they're in police stations without a clear knowledge of where they're going to get their next meal, where they're going to go from there. And then again, is there, Karen, a crime concern? There's some pushback. There was a long meeting today at Chicago City Council with older people saying, hey, wait a second, police stations, this isn't an option.
Right, and now you have the FOP weighing in on this as well, with Catanzara saying that he's actually filing an OSHA complaint about this, because I guess there is a concern for safety for members of CPD. So we'll have to see how far that goes.
And then, Christine, what are the possible solutions here? Because, of course, they're in these police stations right now because there's nowhere else for them to go? Chicago's supposed to be a welcoming city.
Right, so that's kind of the issue, right? All the shelters have reached capacity, and there's just no room for them. So one of the things that were discussed today during that meeting was, all right, is there an empty building? Is there an area somewhere where we could essentially turn that into a shelter of some sort? And that was kind of the topic that they kept discussing today and going about and trying to figure out, okay, how do we help these families who have also told us at the same time, they kind of feel abandoned because they kind of show up, and even some that are at some of these shelters that have been helping them, aside from a language barrier, they've also just kind of been told, just keep waiting.
Does this give any credence to Governor Abbott from Texas, who had said part of why he's going about this strategy of sending immigrants, literally shipping evidently now on planes, asylum seekers, is because Texas can't do it either. Is this changing the national conversation at all, Andy?
I mean, obviously, the conversation being had, you know, if you were truly working in good faith, you'd probably try to make arrangements for these folks when they arrive. However, you know, the crisis is obvious, and you know, Chicago has not been set up to receive these folks. We are not a border state. But you know, I was at our Pacific Garden mission just earlier, a couple weeks ago, and they had, I think they said about more than 100 Central and South American immigrants that, you know, families that are divided because it's a men's shelter, women's shelter. They're in separate parts of the building, and you know, it's just. I mean, it's just a real
From a point of view, so horrific. And you have the city asking the state for money, the state, of course, asking for money from the national government.
And try to repurpose a school somewhere in the city to be.
And there's been
that sort of
pushback even when that
you know,
has
I mean,
happened, though.
It just shows it's just a really incredibly difficult situation.
It's one problem on top of like the already big homeless population issue that the city already has. So it's just another layer. Yeah.
We've got about 4 minutes left, Celeste. I want to go to you because you have spent many of your days recently in the Dirksen Federal Courthouse where the ComEd 4 trial was occurring. Now, jurors last heard from the prosecution and the defense for closing arguments. You're not in the jury room, but what do you think that the takeaways that the jurors are going to remember from that?
You know, what jurors are going to have to do in this trial is essentially draw the line between what amounts to corruptly influencing a public official and what amounts to just lobbying them for their support on the legislation you want. Prosecutors have said that the jobs, the law firm contracts, the internships that these defendants, the ComEd's former CEO and several former lobbyists, have arranged for Madigan Associates over the course of 8 years amounts to a criminal conspiracy. The defense has said this is politics as usual, you know.
Like it or not.
Like it or not, and that's actually exactly what one of the attorneys said in closing arguments. He said, you know, you guys are seeing how the sausage is made in Illinois politics, and it might not be pretty, but that doesn't mean it's illegal. It's not illegal to take a job recommendation from a public
Andy,
official.
I saw your face there.
You know, yeah, I think we remember this argument from the Blagojevich trials, sure. And that it worked for one juror one time, but not the second time around. I mean, I think people do find it pretty distasteful, even if it's dubiously legal. So I do agree that was the thrust.
Celeste, any indication of where the jury is at on this? They did not meet on Friday.
No.
But when might we get a verdict?
You know, they're going to be back at it first thing on Monday. They've had the case for just over 2 days. They've asked a few questions to the judge, but a lot of it has been logistical. They needed a copy of the indictment, copy of transcripts. So, I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but, you know, it's a 7-week trial. It's kind of a legal gray area. It's going to be really interesting.
It got really dense, so that might be difficult.
And
for the jury.
they heard a lot of recordings of these defendants. That to me was one of the most interesting aspects of the trial. You know, the defendants. There were a lot of wiretap recordings. We heard former House Speaker Mike Madigan on some of them. So, however this shakes out, this is going to be a bit of a preview into how the feds might approach the Madigan trial next year.
No, Andy, I want to go to you because at the county courthouse now, moving from the federal over to the county courthouse, there was some controversy this week having to do with the media. In particular, what occurred?
An undisclosed member of the television press, is what I was told, brought the cell phone into the building, which we are allowed to do. Members of the media can bring cell phones, laptops,
but everybody else
and tablets. Not everyone else is. Yeah, there's a whole locker full of members of the public's cell phones that's buzzing and ringing all day long. But yeah, so we, you know, and obviously to do our jobs and as journalists in the current area, we need that technology. So there was issued a ban that was in place for at least today. I hadn't gotten any updates from my friends in the courthouse because, of course, they didn't have their phones.
But 15 seconds. What does that mean for the media? Is that a problem?
it means we're going to get scolded and they're going to lift the ban probably by Monday. So
Okay.
I
So
imagine it happened this afternoon.
this isn't cut off access
Yeah.
forever and for always, at least we hope, because that could mean a lot, of course, for public discourse. At least I like to believe. With that, we are out of time. So our thanks to Celeste Bott, Andy Grimm, Karen Jordan, and Christine Flores. And that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And join us tonight at 10 for Chicago Tonight. On the show, the CTA's latest efforts to tackle a staff shortage and improve unreliable service. And James Big Cat Williams on the Bears' selection of Darnell Wright in the first round of the NFL Draft. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and see you at 10. Celeste, you cover the courts on a regular basis. Were these limitations, did they get in the way? Or I don't know, what are your thoughts? When I'm at the courthouse, it's sort of, all right, I can't take a picture, but why?
No. I mean, you can't audio record and take video and pictures, but I mean, the laptops are essential.
It's easier to type.
Absolutely.
Hey, deadline. You think we're being fussy?
No, I would love to not have a phone or a laptop and just be able to sit there and take some notes, go back to sit at my desk and think things through. My editor's texting me. Come on.
faster than I write, though, so I get more
True,
details
but you
of the
get-
case, more quotes, more. That's just
With
the practical.
practice, you will get so much.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.